Hello, CM365 class. My name is Ben Eganoff, and I'm recording live in my house. I hope all of you are staying safe. And I'll be going over chapter 6 of our book, and that is cranes. So, the controlling entity of the construction site is responsible for cranes when it comes down to it, but it is contracted out most of the time. So, the supplier of the crane who is working on this specific site for the contractor in charge is also responsible as well. And so cranes deal with the lifting and lowering of heavy objects, as you all probably know. And it is also usually the largest piece of equipment on site. And although this next stat is kind of old, from 1996 to 2006, there were 800 fatalities from crane use. So even though it's old, it still holds value in that it shows that cranes are very dangerous and even life-threatening if you're not safe with them. Now getting into the types of cranes, there are three cranes that you'll see mostly on job sites, and those are mobile, tower, and articulating cranes. And even though there are other many types of cranes, which I've listed in the next slide, these are the three you'll see most of the time when working in construction. So the first one, a mobile crane, is a cable-controlled crane mounted on crawlers or rubber-tired carriers. And a mobile crane is basically used to lift heavy objects short distances or to help construct larger tower cranes, which as you can see is the next picture. That's a tower crane, and it is mainly used to lift heavy things in constructing bridges or large skyscraper buildings. And tower cranes are in a fixed position and just rotate from the base itself from that fixed position. And articulating cranes are also called boom cranes because they have a boom on the crane that articulates in the center, which allows back and forth movement of a load, which is very advantageous because it this movement is quicker movement of materials. It allows for quicker movement, and the articulating cranes are mostly used to place meter vaults or steel plates a lot of the time. And a meter vault is something that helps to provide easy access for water meters. Now, as I said, here are the other types of cranes that you can also see. I'm not going to go into each one specifically, but I just wanted to show this to just really hit home how there are so many different types of cranes. So in this presentation, I can't go over every one, but I just wanted to really hit on the three main ones, which are mobile, tower, and articulated once again. But these are just other types of cranes you could see on a job site, but these aren't as common. So I just have them listed here, as you can see. Now here at Ball State, we have several cranes on campus, and these pictures were taken in the first semester. And as you can see, this is a tower crane, and it is the biggest thing on site, as the second picture that is taken up on the 8th floor of Stu West, and that just goes on to show how big this crane actually is. And the construction of this project is actually, they're pretty close to being done, as I drove past it about a week ago, and there looks like they're wrapping up. But the project itself, it's a parking garage, which is supposed to be 4 floors with over 600 spaces. So I'm going to get into the attachments that are used on cranes, as there are many kinds of attachments that you can use, but these are just some of the main ones, again, that you will see. The first one is a lifting hook, which is a device that is used for grabbing and lifting loads by means of a crane in this case, and it is usually equipped with a safety latch to prevent disengagement, and you can see that on the first picture I've provided. That is a lifting hook. And then next is a magnet, which has a switch that turns on and off a magnetic field, and magnets are used to lift steel and iron in most cases. Next is a concrete bucket, which I also have pictured, and concrete buckets, as you, as you probably know, the name tells you what it is essentially. It moves concrete around a job site, up floors, so you can pour out concrete without having to go up each floor. A crane really expedites the process. So a concrete bucket has a removable gate that lets out the concrete where it is needed. And personnel platforms, as I'm sure all of you have seen, lift up people and carry workers or crews to places that a ladder cannot reach. And most of the time, personnel platforms will be used when working with a cell tower. And finally, I have augers and drills, and these are just attached to a crane, which are used to make holes. Now, to get your crane license, you need to meet one of these four operator qualifications, and all of these you usually have to complete a 1 to 3 year apprenticeship program. And once you successfully complete that, you'll need to have required on-job site training as well as technical training and exams, and this is usually through a crane operator test, which is the first thing listed, or you can get it through your employer through a company audited program, and then the other two are through state or local government and through the Armed Forces or Department of Defense. So these are just the four ways that you can get your crane license and to become a crane operator. When operating cranes, the use of a dedicated spotter is needed when the vision of sight is not clear for the operator. So this dedicated spotter will help with your view and make sure that you know where you are when operating a crane and when it is clear to move and lift or lower the object that you are lifting. And the dedicated spotter just needs to make sure that they have good communication with you at all times, as good communication is key for operating as safely as possible. And the spotter must be qualified, they must know how to spot, and they need to know the proper hand or radio signals, whichever one you're doing, when operating a crane. And the spotter must also be equipped with visual aid if he or she cannot clearly judge the clearance distance that is required. And I'll talk about this later, as clearance distance is very important, especially when you are operating a crane near power lines, as that can be a very dangerous situation, and OSHA has certain regulations that once again I'll speak about later in this presentation about how far and how close you can get the crane to those power lines. Now for inspections, it is a requirement from OSHA that you inspect a crane before each use and after using a crane, and this inspection should be done by a competent person, and OSHA defines a competent person as one who is capable of identifying existing and predictable hazards in the surrounding or working conditions which are unsanitary, hazardous, or dangerous to employees. So this competent person is really essential in inspections, and you must always have one when inspecting a crane. And the most important thing when inspecting a crane is you must look for what kind of ground it's on, the type of the weather for the day, and if any of that is sketchy, you should just delay the crane use for a different time. And wire rope conditions for it to be taken out, I have listed a few. As you can see, significant corrosion, heat damage, improperly applied end connections, prior electrical contact with the lower line, kinking, crushing, and unstranding. And these just make a dangerous situation when operating if any of these happen to the wire rope itself. And I included two pictures of a perfectly good conditioned wire rope, which is the top one, and then the second one, which is very corroded, and if you were caught by OSHA using a wire rope like this, you would be fined for that. And just when inspecting a crane, you should make sure that you really are doing it to the best of your ability, because once again, if you end up having an accident and then OSHA finds out that the crane wasn't fully operational and that there was something wrong with it, big fines would be coming your way. So you just need to make sure that things like tires are properly inflated and there's no like deformation, cracks, or wearing of the crane itself. You just need to look for little things like that as well as the big things as well. When you're operating the crane itself, there's a rated capacity listed by the manufacturer of the weight that the crane can hold. And so you must make sure that whenever you use a crane that you let the manufacturer know what that weight actually is. And if that weight changes for some reason, if you have to add or take off any part of that load, you must let the manufacturer know, because this could change how the crane is set up. Because if the load changes, this could also mean that the crane could move or tilt because of this change. So you just make sure to be safe that the manufacturer knows at all times what that capacity is. And when when moving a crane around a job site or construction site, you just need to make sure that the boom is lowered, because this is just another safety precaution. Because if the boom is up, that has a greater chance for there to be an accident to occur on site. And employees must always know when a crane is moving and must stand clear of the loads lifted. And when the crane is in use, they just need to make sure that they're not around that area, because if anything falls from the crane and employees are standing below, that would be a very dangerous situation, which it's sad to say, but that's how many accidents happen with cranes from falls. About 20% actually happen because of that. So you just need to make sure that when you're on site, you always know if the crane is being operated that day. And once again, as I mentioned already, you must notify the manufacturer if the load size has changed. And then also when dealing with cranes, you need to properly label everything. And some of those things include load capacities, operating speeds, and hazard warnings. And this is just another requirement by OSHA just to when operating cranes. And lastly, before you actually do operate a crane, a lift plan is essential, lifting plan. So you know what the game plan is, and a supervisor should also usually conduct a pre-lift brief to the team before operating a crane, just so everybody knows what is going on and what is expected from each crew member when a crane is in use. When dealing with assembly and disassembly of a crane, this is one of the main causes of fatalities in dealing with cranes. But there are several different procedures that you can use as a guide to follow under OSHA. But regardless, you must always comply with the manufacturer prohibitions of that specific supplier of the crane. And at a bare minimum, these are three main things you should do with assembly and disassembly. You should always prevent unintended movement, provide adequate support, and position employees appropriately. So all of these must be done by a competent and qualified person, and this is usually the assembly disassembly director. And they must take several precautionary steps, such as checking the site and ground conditions, checking the weather and wind speed, and blocking material that could be in the way when moving a crane. And you just always just make sure that the crew understands their tasks and the hazards associated with those tasks, because construction site is very dangerous, especially when moving a crane. So you just need to make sure that the crew is very cautious and aware of their surroundings. Now, causes of death. So these are just some facts right here. Contact with the object or equipment. So this is basically assembly or disassembly when using a crane. Causes for 62% of fatalities. Falls of just lifting or lowering objects and something falling from the object being lifted accounts for 20%. Then transportation incidents of just moving cranes around the construction site is 10%. And then contact with electrical current, which I'll get to in the next slide, accounts for 90% of 8% of fatalities in dealing with cranes. But with all these statistics, 90% of crane accidents are due to human error. So this is just really eye-opening and shows that you must really be careful when dealing with cranes or anything on a construction site for that matter. So as I said, I'm going to get into power lines a little bit. So you must always assume a power line is energized, because if you don't, you could really get some big fines from OSHA. And so you just always must de-energize power lines when you are operating with a crane. But if they are energized, there are certain requirements for the clearance distance of how far away you must be from them. And um, you should always warn your crew of the risk of electrocution, the proper steps you must take when dealing with it. And whenever dealing with power lines, you are always required to use a spotter or proximity alarm that alerts the operator of how close they are to the power line itself. And so the clearance distance is from the highest point on the crane. So the highest point on the crane must be at the minimum distance away from the power line. And just once again, you must ensure it's off. And here in the next slide, I'll show you the table that OSHA has. So basically, this is the table that was in our book of the minimum clearance distance required when dealing with power lines, and it gives the voltage of power lines and then the minimum distance clearance. So the closest you can get is 10 feet, but that's only with the voltage 50 or less. And then 45 feet is the minimum distance for voltage 750 to 1000. And so just this table really, like, you're not gonna know the exact distance you are from the power line, but you just need to make sure that you have a really dedicated spotter who is really cautious and lets you know clearly and effectively how close you are to that power line. Because if you do get too close to that power line, you don't need to be touching it to get electrocuted, as some, as you can see, can get up there in voltage and be very dangerous and just cause for a really unfortunate situation to happen that could be avoided if the operator and dedicated spotter are communicating effectively, which they should be whenever dealing with the power line, even if it is de-energized, because power lines are very dangerous and can cause for a lot of harm. Now here I'm going to go through a real life accident that happened in Seattle, and this was in 2018, and it dealt with the disassembly of a crane. And here's a picture from the accident. As you can see, it's in a busy intersection, which looks like that's in the city. And so there were 4 fatalities and 8 injured. And basically what happened is the company in charge of the crane didn't follow rules and removed pins too quickly, causing the crane to fall over. And this ended up killing 2 people driving cars just by the construction site, and then 2 iron workers as well who were working on site. And the supplier of the crane was fined $70,000, with 2 other companies on the job site who were also fined, and I couldn't find those numbers. But this just goes to show how most incidents are due to human error, and if they just followed the rules and didn't remove those pins like they were supposed to, if they removed them how the specific supplier was supposed to, this wouldn't have happened. So it's avoidable, but it's just a scary situation that happens every year, in fact. As I had a video to show you guys, but I will not, because it looks like I'm running short on time. And the video is about 13 minutes, and it just basically recaps what I've been talking about throughout this presentation, as I hit most of the main points. But this video talks about some of the nittier, more pickier stuff of OSHA requirements when dealing with cranes. But like I said, we don't need to get into that, as I'm coming up on my 20 minutes. So this video was just a good video that really encapsulates what I've been saying and is something that really hits home to this presentation. And here are my sources. And if you guys have any questions about my presentation, feel free to contact me. And thank you for listening, and I hope all of you are staying safe during this crazy time. Thank you.